Okay, let's look at some pictures now. So way up to the north, we've got Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi. Okay, this is a cave. This is at the foot of Mount Hermon. Let me just switch between two pictures quickly. This is a picture off in the distance. The highest mountain off in the distance is Mount Hermon. And the picture that we're going to go back to is kind of just at the base of Mount Hermon. Okay, not on these hills. This is looking far, far back. This is in between this and Mount Hermon is the Sea of Galilee, part of the Sea of Galilee. So we're looking up to the north. But what I want you to see here is a cave, okay, Caesarea Philippi. There's some little niches in the rocks you might be able to make out. This is the place in Matthew 16 where Peter confesses that Jesus is the Christ. Okay, now looking at that cave, it's not a very big cave. You can stand right at the front and look and see the base of it, all the way into the cave. But it was considered to be an access point to Hades. And in these little niches were different pagan statues that were worshipped. So this is a center of pagan worship. I'm personally not convinced that Jesus and his disciples are having a picnic right there, although today it's a very nice place to have a picnic. But I would think that Jesus would be perhaps removed somewhat from this area looking at it. But it's very interesting that this is where Peter confesses that Jesus is the Christ. We'll look at this in Matthew 16. But also Jesus says that upon this rock, meaning upon this confession, Jesus is going to build his church, and the gates of hell, the gates of Hades, will not overcome it. So very important. Two things at least are going on there. One, Jesus has his disciples in a thoroughly Gentile area to help them understand the significance of the church is far beyond just the boundaries of Israel. But secondly, how the demonic world, how the spiritual realm of evil is going to be overcome or conquered is going to be through the church. And we'll look at that theologically when we look at Matthew, but to me that's really helpful to see. Jesus is looking at something when he's making this statement. It's not just an abstract concept. He's looking at something. That would be very helpful. Okay, this next picture is just kind of a panorama view, as I said, looking north to Mount Hermon. Kind of the boundaries of our gospel accounts. There's at least two other places in Israel that are put forth as the location of the Transfiguration, but I think it makes good sense to have Mount Hermon be the location of the Transfiguration. Okay, so very high mountain, right up there next to the place, because the event that takes place after that is Peter's confession that Jesus is the Christ. So again, we're just kind of looking at some of the geography here. The upper Galilee area, just so you get a picture of what it looks like. Not flat, very beautiful. Some parts of this upper Galilee area are nicknamed today, currently, Little Switzerland, and they actually look like the Swiss Alps in some places. Very beautiful. This picture is going to the east of the Sea of Galilee, up to the north, but to the east, and this is in what's called the Golan Heights. If you know about modern Israel's history, you'll know that this is an area of intense fighting with the Syrians in 1967. This picture is a picture of a synagogue, and the area is called Gamla. We don't need to worry about it, but it's probable that this was when Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2. It's probable that they would have come to this synagogue and preached the gospel there. Okay? Just again, notice this is taken in the spring. Okay, and how do we know that? Because the hills are green. Guarantee that if you don't go there in the springtime, the hills are not green. These aerial shots are obviously ones I didn't take, but if you're curious, these are all from BiblePlaces.com, Todd Bolin, and they're used with permission. You can get some of these free on the website. You can also buy his CDs, and they're just fantastic pictures. Some of them are mine, some of them are his. This is an aerial shot just looking at Capernaum, and you can see the hills in the background. So this is looking at the north shore. And then this is that tranquil picture I showed you of kind of near the place where John 21 would have taken place when Jesus is walking on the beach with Peter. We'll talk about that when we get to John's Gospel. But again, a beautiful area. I want you to just look at the topography. Not this beach, but this area generally is the location of the parable of the sower. So we're going to want to think a little bit about what that looks like. A couple beautiful pictures. It's hard to not get these wonderful sunset pictures. But this is just a picture of the beauty of the Sea of Galilee. This picture I also like because if you look carefully, you can see the wind on the water. Okay, the patterns, if you're used to looking at that, but there's the front part of the picture shows a lot of wind. Those are downdrafts coming off of the mountains. So if you're on a boat, that's important. You pay attention to those kinds of things. Okay, now we're going to go, the northern part is Galilee. Galilee is the farthest to the north that we're going to focus on. We do have accounts where Jesus goes outside of Galilee that we talked about. Caesarea Philippi and then Mount Hermon are all the way to the north. But as a region, Galilee is going to be the furthest north as a region. And then south of that is going to be Samaria. And then south of that is Judea. So we have Galilee, Samaria, Judea. Galilee, a mixed area, but a lot of Jewish concentration there. There's some very large Gentile cities like Sepphoris and Tiberias, but a lot of Jewish villages as well. Samaria, we have some Gentile settlements, some cities, some very important Gentile cities like Sebasti. We'll look at those, but not a Jewish area. And then we're going to go into Galilee, and once again, we're going to have significant Gentile establishments and areas, but primarily a Jewish area. Okay, so just want you to kind of have a sense of that. And let's go ahead now and look at this. This is Mount Gerizim. This is a very old picture. I did not take this picture, but if you go there today, this area has built up so much that I like this picture because current pictures of this area are harder to actually see what's going on. It's just built up quite a bit. The area, the rocks in the front are the archaeological remains of Shechem, which takes us back to the time of Abraham. And in between the archaeological remains of Shechem, if you kind of go in amongst those buildings, if you knew exactly where to go, you'd go to a Syrian monastery, and in that Syrian monastery you'd go to a well, which is Jacob's well, and would be the location of where Jesus met with the woman at the well. Okay? It's a very, very deep well, and I don't think there's any reason to doubt that it is the original well. Okay? It's a very deep well. You can take a crank handle and draw up a cup of water and then dump the water down the well and then count how many seconds it takes before you hear the splash. It's about 3 or 4 seconds, so it's a pretty deep well, actually. It's still with water. Now it's covered over, it's inside, but in Jesus' time it wasn't. And so when Jesus is speaking to the woman at the well, she says, "My ancestors worship on this mountain." And she's pointing to Mount Gerizim right here. And at the top of that is, to this day even, a Samaritan area. It's not a temple, but an area where sacrifices are carried out for the Samaritan Passover. And if you remember from Joshua's account, again, this is not a picture I took. It's a very old picture because this whole area has now got a refugee settlement, essentially in this area. To the left is Mount Gerizim. To the right is Mount Ebal. And if you remember when there was the rearticulation, the reaffirmation or re-ratification of the covenant in Joshua, there was an antiphonal response back and forth with one group of people on one mountain, one group on the other, echoing and answering back and forth. And what's very interesting is that if you go to the top of Mount Gerizim today, there's a lot of traffic noise, but you can hear sounds in an odd way. So I think that account is entirely plausible. If you were to remove modern kind of sounds that tend to absorb a lot, and if you were in a place where you didn't have traffic and didn't have just kind of that ambient background noise, the account, I think, is absolutely plausible. And again, these are not pictures I took, but just to help you see, this is a Samaritan Passover sacrifice on Mount Gerizim. And just when we talk about the Samaritans, I want us to think about this again, that what she's referring to is that there was a temple that was destroyed a couple hundred years before the time of Jesus, but she's referring to worship on the top of Mount Gerizim, worship that still takes place. The rest of Samaria is a beautiful hilly area that you can see the terraced farms there, different kind of agriculture. There are some flat valleys. If you look carefully at the bottom of that picture, you can see some open areas that are cultivated. These are the remains of the road that would take us up to Sebasti. Sebaste is a very important city that Herod built in honor of Caesar Augustus. So we're going to go through Jewish history, Jewish backgrounds, the Gospels, and then we're eventually going to talk about Greco-Roman backgrounds. And when we do, I'll talk a little bit again about Sebaste. But it's very important to think about that Herod is building a city in honor of Augustus. There are going to be a lot of Jews at that time who are not going to be happy with that. And a city that's named after the Roman emperor. And again, just to give you a good sense of, as I said, some steep valleys, okay? You're not taking chariots up those. So just to kind of get a sense of the lay of the land. You notice all of the sheep. This is an area that a lot of this area is in the West Bank. And so you have Israel, and then you have the Palestinian Authority. And in some of the areas in the Palestinian Authority, they're not as developed, and so it's actually possible to get pictures today that look very much like the time of Jesus. So this picture, here's another picture. Again, these are very, very common, typical scenes if you're in these areas to see. And then just one final picture of the Dothan Valley that's there, but just to see this, that you can have modern agriculture. It's a very fertile area. Now we get into Judea, either one of those terms. And what I want us to see now is these are going to be the Judean foothills. We're not going to look at Jerusalem. We're going to come back to Jerusalem, but Jerusalem is in this area. This picture, what I want you to just see is notice the ridge. Remember I talked about those ridges? So here we've got a hilly area and then a settlement on top of the ridge. Okay, so that area that's settled is nicely settled on the top of the ridge, which makes it very easy to travel. Also a very fertile area, okay, a beautiful area. We're going to come back, though, and look at that in a little bit more detail, because now what I want to do is I want to go from the furthest south, the Negev, and then we're going to turn the plane around and go from west to east. So now we're going to look at the below Judea, the Negev, and you're going to see now that apart from modern irrigation, this is a very arid area, very, very arid. I think I've got some more pictures coming up, but what I want you to see right now is just, again, now that you've seen this much of the land, and we're going to look at the Negev in a little bit, just notice kind of the division here is really meant to show you kind of the division of what sometimes we think about as the water flow, but just the divide. So on the one side, water would flow to the west. On the other side, water would flow to the east. But it just shows you that kind of spine that runs down the foothills. Okay, then we have on the other side of that, there's another kind of line that runs down, which is the Jordan Rift Valley. Okay, so I just want you to have a good sense of that. Now we'll look at some more pictures of the Negev, very arid area. This is what people typically think about when they think about Israel. And notice that we've gone through a lot of the country before we've come to a place like this. That is very arid. It is completely, this is an area where you need to know how to find water. Okay, so we're going to, as I said, now we're going to take the plane and we're going to go from the west to the east. And this is going to be obviously the Mediterranean. But what I want you to see here is notice that nice flat area. This is Ashkelon looking up to Tel Aviv. But just notice nice and flat. Okay, good place to put a road. So when you go back and look at that map, you'll see there's a good reason why the ancient road went right there. That's exactly where you're going to build a road. This is just looking at the excavations in Ashkelon, some very significant excavations there. As you move away from the Mediterranean, you can see the Mediterranean out there, but you get into what is called the Plain of Sharon. Now it's a very fertile agricultural area. I mean, it was fertile in ancient times as well, but just want you to kind of see that, again, very, very flat area. As you start going further east, though, you start coming into these rolling hills. And these rolling hills are eventually going to, you can kind of see if you look up, you can see how those are going to begin to become valleys, and here's an example of what they become like. Okay? So these valleys are kind of east-west or west-east, natural ways up to that ridge that we saw on the map. Okay, so the ridge goes north-south and the valleys go east-west. And again, for our purposes, we're not going to spend as much time talking about this. We will talk a little bit about Herod and some of these valleys, but I just want you to have a sense. We've hopped over Jerusalem. We're in the area around Jerusalem, but this is the Judean wilderness. So this is going to be the area where Jesus is going to spend 40 days and 40 nights. It's very, very rugged territory, very rugged. It's got its own kind of beauty, and there are some, particularly at sunset, this area can just be stunningly beautiful. But I want you to just see how rugged and isolated and desolate it is. So this is the area to which the Spirit casts out Jesus, as it's described during when we have right after Jesus' baptism. Mark's gospel account uses the same word that's associated with casting out a demon, saying that the Spirit cast Jesus out into this area. I think very deliberately to see that Jesus is going into this area to do warfare, to do battle. Okay, and he's going to be victorious. This is the hostile area in which that takes place. Now, I put this picture in just because I wanted you to see how this area can be transformed. I can't help but look at pictures like this and think of Isaiah 35 and think about other places in Isaiah where it's talking about the transformation of the wilderness as just a picture of God's ultimate final restoration, but just to get a sense of how different this area can look in different seasons. And this, of course, is with all of the poppies, the red poppies that are common. Don't worry about this, the Nahal. It's a valley, a canyon. But again, now we've gone past the Judean wilderness, and now we're getting towards the Dead Sea. So this is looking at the area around Jericho and just looking at the Dead Sea area. Pretty arid, desolate region. Okay? This is a picture that's looking from the west side of the Dead Sea across the Dead Sea into what is modern-day Jordan and the Jordan mountains there. This is all the way down, okay, in Eilat and Aqaba, so kind of down in the area near Sinai. From here you would go to Sinai. So just now all the way at the furthest part of the southern part of modern-day Israel, but at the top of the Red Sea. And then coming back up, this is just an area, this is a little bit south of Qumran, but this is along the Dead Sea. So just again, to get a sense of how isolated, how desolate that area is around the Dead Sea. This is an area that is, again, looking out over the Dead Sea. It looks inviting, but it's about 32% salt, so it is less inviting than the pictures look. Some pictures just of Qumran. Just wanted to show you that area. This is the scriptorium where the scrolls would have been copied, but those caves. So this is a great place to store manuscripts for a couple thousand years. Okay? Nice, dry, arid, get them packed in sand, and you're ready to go. This picture I just wanted to show you of how compressed the land is. Okay? Sometimes people have a sense of how kind of thinking about these distances being spread out, but Israel is a really compressed country. So in one shot, you can see this aerial shot, we're looking, as you can see here, Mount of Olives, so just behind the Temple Mount, the Judean wilderness, I showed you pictures of that, the Dead Sea, we just saw pictures of that, and the Herodium. We'll look at that later when we look at Herod. It's a fortress that Herod built, and then later it became his tomb, was redesigned to be his tomb. Now we're going to look at a quick map of Jerusalem. The area over that's got a square around it is the Temple Mount. Okay, the Temple Mount as it would have been constructed at the time of Herod, and that would coincide with the time of Jesus. Coming down from that, we've got the Kidron Valley, and then we're going to have the area which is sometimes is called the City of David, would be one of the oldest parts of Jerusalem. This next picture is kind of coming at it from the same perspective. Okay, there's the Kidron Valley coming down, and there's the Temple Mount. We're going to talk more about that because that Temple Mount that was constructed by Herod just dominates that part of the city. And in time of Jesus, that would have dominated Jerusalem. And then a couple more pictures of that you can see the Temple Mount by the Gold Dome. And then again, just kind of looking around, just want you to see fortress looking like thing that's on the top there dates to the time of the Crusaders. That's not to the time of Jesus. All of that Temple Mount was destroyed when the Romans came in 70. But this just gives you a sense of what Jerusalem, the old part of Jerusalem, looks like now. But again, this does not date to the time of Jesus, except for this tower, which was left by the Romans. They destroyed just about everything, but they left this tower intact so that there would always be a hint of what Jerusalem had looked like before the Romans had come in. And when we talk about history, we talk about Second Temple history, we're going to talk a lot about the times that the Romans come in. It's never good when the Romans have to come in, okay? Never good. And so we're going to talk about some of those. But this would be all that's pretty much left over of the time period before 70 AD when the Romans come in and destroy the Temple Mount. This is just a picture of the old city. That arch dates to the Crusader time. So again, once you're in the old city on top of the Temple Mount, there's nothing standing there from the time of Jesus. You have to go under the Temple Mount, and this is an area you can visit that would take us down, quite a bit down, to go down to the base and to get to a place that's been excavated that does take us to the time of Jesus. Okay? And that's one of the things that's hard. If you're in a city that has been occupied as densely as Jerusalem has, it's hard to get back to a place where we can find things that are unambiguously from the time of Jesus. But these are some of the things we can see. And then one final picture, just to kind of put it all back together again. So we'll look at another map. We've done a pretty wide-ranging tour of the land. And we started up there in the northern part in Galilee. So now you can recognize, hopefully, the Sea of Galilee. And recall that that area up there is mountainous, has beautiful trees, has the Sea of Galilee, a very beautiful area, water, all those kinds of things. When we went down into the center part, Samaria, also mountainous, fertile area. Got down into Judea, and you can see right there Jerusalem, kind of in the center, the green dot in the center there. And again, mountainous, hilly, moving from there down into the Dead Sea, very arid, that entirely arid area. Then going back over, now look at the road. Now you've seen pictures, you can see why the road goes the way it does, right? Nice flat, then it goes up and it goes in through. You can see the spine that goes out to Haifa, that goes out to Mount Carmel, and the road going through the natural kind of cull where you would build a road, and then going right past Capernaum and then going all the way up to Damascus.